All right, perfect. And we're recording. All right, I'm going to give people maybe another 15 seconds for this poll before I close it. Thank you all. Again, thank you all for coming in here and completing this, getting more people coming in. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. We got a good amount of people that have provided information. And let's see, close the poll. Perfect. All right. Great, and it looks like we had people to, for your knowledge, Rita and Victoria, between minimal and moderate is what folks have indicated on the poll. So just to let you know from our audience members that folks have indicated minimal and moderate in regards to their current knowledge. So that being said, it is 3 o'clock on the dot, and let's go ahead and get started. So if we want to go to the next slide, Rita, we can get started with today's webinar. Again, a good afternoon to everyone for today's webinar. My name is William Moore, and I'm with OJJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. And as your technical host, I would like to take just a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the WebEx platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. Please note that this event is being recorded, and the recording will be linked to our YouTube page. You can view past webinar events that are archived on our YouTube page, and you'll click on the link here, or you'll see the link here, and you can go straight there to view past archived Zero Abuse webinars as well. If you'd like to receive the transcript or any supporting materials related to those webinars, please be sure to contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk at OJJDP-TTA@usdoj.gov. If you're having trouble uploading any of the event materials prior to the webinar, then please be sure to reach out to the OJJDP TTA Help Desk. If you would like to have optimal audio for today's webinar, then please be sure to dial out through the WebEx, into WebEx through your phone. When you're connected through a phone or a headset, the icon should appear next to your name in the participants panel. At the end of today's webinar, there will be a Q&A session where the presenter will address some of the questions posed during the presentation. Please type your question into the chat box as they arise. Instructions on how to send a message in the chat is on this slide. Now, for those of you who are participating in today's webinar as a group, meaning it's yourself and additional people, we'd like to help you to practice utilizing the chat by taking a few minutes just to help us count. If you are viewing by yourself, there's no need to type anything at this time. However, if you're viewing in a group, meaning there's more than one individuals who are with you, please be sure to go into the chat and type the total number of additional people that are in the room with you today. Again, if you're viewing alone, there's no need to type anything at this time. However, if you're viewing with other individuals, you can type in those total number of additional people that are in the room with you today. So for me, if it's me and my mom watching today's webinar, I will put a +1 in the chat. So type the total number of additional people in the room with you today. Now, for those who are signed in, please note that you will receive an automated email that will have a certificate of attendance. However, for those of you who participated in a group, meaning you had an additional person to join with you, you will need to download the group certificate, group validation form that you should have received. In that form, what you'll do is go and you will complete the names of individuals who are the additional folks that you would like to receive the certificate, and you will send that to OJJDP-TTA@usdoj.gov. All right, with that being said, I would like to turn over today's webinar to our presenter, Rita. Rita, please take it away.
Awesome, William. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today. I am so excited to be here. We've got a great topic to talk about today for our multidisciplinary teams. But let me tell you a little bit about me if you don't know me. I'm Rita Farrell. I'm the Director of Child First with the Zero Abuse Project. I've been in the field for about 23 years. I started off as a founding executive director of a child advocacy center and forensic interviewer. And when I think one of the most important things I want to tell you about myself is when I'm not training for Zero Abuse Project, I'm part of a multidisciplinary team here in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I regularly still conduct forensic interviews. So I'm in the room doing the work. I want to start off by also saying you all provided wonderful pre-questions. If there's a question that I don't get to, please email me. My email is right there. We are available for consultation, technical assistance. That's another part, an important part of my job. My job's to make your job easier. We want to provide you the support you need in the field for your jobs. So I'll try to get to all of the questions after we go through the corroborating evidence material, but just wanted you to know too, Zero Abuse Project is always here for any of your needs. Well, let's get started. We've got a great agenda today. Our topic today is corroborating evidence, and this is really for the entire multidisciplinary team, from your prosecutors, law enforcement, forensic interviewers, and all other team members, medical, mental health, peripheral team members. It really needs to have a full holistic approach for all of our team on how we're investigating these cases. There's my email again. And we want to thank funding through our Trauma-Informed Prosecutor Project and this webinar being offered by OJJDP. So I want us to think first about our forensic interviews. You know, I often hear in the field that our job as a forensic interviewer is to get that disclosure. Well, I want you to know today that's not our job. Our job is to provide an environment that allows a child to feel comfortable to talk about anything they've experienced or not experienced. You're going to hear me talk about today the entire holistic approach that we should take from the very onset of an outcry all the way through our judicial process. We need to start taking that holistic approach so that we put together better cases. And so when I think about forensic interviews, I think about what that flow should be. I think we should definitely start talking again about the art and science of forensic interviewing. And I'm just going to ask a question. You don't have to answer, but I love saying this because I think it's a good starting point. How many of you know someone who should never talk or listen to kids? I'm sure many of you could raise your hands. As you're thinking about that, I want you to think of the adjectives that described that individual. I love it. I'm getting some chats. Yes, yes, yes. We all know those individuals, and you all probably heard me say that in some other training. But there is a true art and science to forensic interviewing. The art is your flow, your connection, your ability to listen and gather those facts for your investigators. That's your personality. The science is all of the research, protocols, things that we can teach you about our process and what to do and what not to do, but there's got to be a balance of both. I think when we look at corroborating evidence, we want our forensic interviews to flow like this. I look at it as we have this process listening to a child, and we always want to follow that child in our flexible models and fall back on our protocols and process. And we're guiding in a non-leading, non-suggestive manner, of course, but we're guiding that child to be able to communicate about anything. So I want us to not just look solely on the allegation before us, but I want us to look more holistic, because what we see is kind of that grasping at straws. Do you not love this road sign here? This is actually somewhere in the world, the big fork in a road, right? Of where do I go next? If we are in our forensic interviews asking what question do I ask next, we're asking too many closed, direct questions. So I want you to open it up. We all know that the most preferred question type in forensic interviewing is open-ended questions, right? Working through an hourglass approach of maybe starting open, maybe asking a yes or no or more direct, but immediately following it up with an open-ended. There's some amazing research done by Wolfman and others and Tom Lyon about really looking at question formation and what they call pairing. Tom Lyon's recent article on faux invitations really rang true for me as far as how critical our question formation is in gathering the facts for our investigators. And so we want to look at one solid road. You may turn, you may go, but we don't want the big fork in the road, right? And kind of wondering, where do I go next? That's not going to make sense to the child, to the interviewer, and then let's look holistically. Your team is not going to understand, you're going to lose your team, and ultimately it's the jurors that are also going to be lost. So we want to organize our interviews in a way that is that sequential piece that you all need for your cases, right? And so I often think that interviewers say, well, we're going to go from, the start to the finish and gather what we can about all the acts and da-da-da-da-da. But the reality is the importance of corroborating questions needs to be included in any process, any nationally recognized protocol that you're using, right? Your job as an interviewer is to elicit that information. However, that forensic interview is but one piece of an entire investigation. There's no one right way to interview a child, right? All children, all cases, everything's different. But one thing's for sure, we don't want a he said, she said case. We often hear from particular regions in our nation, and one of the main topics that prosecutors bring up to us is that we still have that he said, she said case. And so I think, gosh, why is that, right? Is it the investigators? Is it the forensic interview? Is it just not understanding that corroborating evidence piece? And so I want everyone to know that it's everyone on our team, right? If I, though, at the very onset don't gather the appropriate information from the child for the investigators to corroborate or refute, right, those children's statements, then it won't end very well in the judicial process. We all know why. We all follow best practice. And in that best practice, with every child statement, which is, as you know, the best indicator that something has happened, right? With our question formation, investigators should be able to find 20 to 40 corroborating details. And so I think oftentimes we think about all the things we're doing in our process from the beginning to the middle to the end, right? Working or looking to get that disclosure. And then the child discloses and the interviewers kind of have an oh crap moment, like what? Where do I go from here? And so I never want us to do that. We have to remember when a child discloses, it's our role to gather all of that information so that the investigators can go corroborate, and not having where things are or what things sounded like, sight, sound, smells, taste, sensory, all of those things, we're not going to be able to put thorough investigations together. So a couple reminders and considerations for being able to gather as much possible corroborating evidence that we can is to, one, focus on episodic event retrieval. I think that this is something in the field that's oftentimes abandoned by interviewers, and I want us to remember that episodic memory training, right? I want us to remember our role, and we want to gather all the details of that disclosure. I also want you to consider that, especially in this time of the pandemic, no matter what process you use or what nationally protocol you use, recognized protocol you use, is that we want to be exploring polyvictimization. Polyvictimization and exploring for all forms of maltreatment in our interviews is critical, especially during the pandemic. We have at Zero Abuse Project created a sample list of questions. It can be provided for you. Just let us know if you'd like it. We have a polyvictimization screen and a sample list of questions. And that sample list of questions isn't anything that any interviewer is going to take into the interview, but it's definitely going to give them an idea of questions to ask during exploring other forms of maltreatment. So we have questions on neglect, polyvictimization, as I said, victims of human trafficking, psychological maltreatment, those ICAC cases, working technology and sprinkling technology types of questions organically during our interview is so beneficial. We also have and are working on questions that interviewers should ask on strangulation cases, right? And those, like I said, technology facilitated crimes. In addition to kind of working within those other forms of maltreatment and the sample list of questions, I highly recommend that we do a lot more interviewer preparation with our team and have a discussion on what is happening for this particular case, this particular family, to understand their needs. I had an interviewer call me a few weeks ago saying, I still go into my interviews blind. That was a term we used to use many years ago. And I just want to let you know today, we should not be going into our interviews blind. And that basically means you don't have very much information. I want you to have just the opposite. I want you to know everything. I want you to know how this report came, history within the family in our system, what we know about the child's abilities or disabilities, right? What is the child's willingness or unwillingness to participate in our process, right? And then when we think about our question formation, remembering that kind of road sign that we want, right? We need to also explore disclosure information, relationship information, grooming. I think we think so much about the acts that somebody did to a child's body or the acts that a child was made to do to somebody else's body that we forget about the other things in a case that our law enforcement and investigators need. I interview victims of human trafficking, and part of my interview always includes the operational pieces, right? The things about the relationship, how it started, the people, places, sensory, peripheral. These may seem like very basic concepts to consider, but what we're regularly seeing is the he said, she said cases, right? And those elements not being corroborated or refuted. So think about what your team needs to gather for their charging information, and let's look at some sample language. I also want to note that as you use any interviewing aids and media, we're going to talk in this hour about introducing evidence. That's an emerging topic in our field, and I'm going to give you some recommendations on that as well. But interviewing aids, if used properly, are wonderful benefits for corroborating information. I think about when I draw the event location or timelines, it prods a child's memory. It can give them additional details. We're basically trying to elicit this information in a very clean, neutral, non-leading way, but providing them a wealth of information to go gather. We're going to go through a scenario that really will give you sample question. I'm all good on, I love sharing sample language, right? Because sample language is how you can make it your own with your art, but gives you a starting and launching off point in kind of organizing those questions. When we think of sample language, we don't want to just limit ourselves. We want to include disclosure information, the first person they told, talking about relationships with other people. Of course, we always want to make our questions, right, age and developmentally appropriate, but we do need to explore with children things outside the realm that can be corroborated, like how they met, where did they meet, what was the first thing you and your neighbor did together? A case example that I had years ago was a non-disclosing child. And as I'm exploring all of the peripheral relationship pieces with this individual, which happened to be the neighbor was our alleged offender, I talked about, places that the child went, and she disclosed to me that she loved the parade she got to go to. And I said, tell me everything about the parade. Tell me all about the parade, right? During that neutral discussion about the parade, she brought in the neighbor. And so if we are solely looking at the offender or honing in on something, that's not productive. What we want to have it come from is from the child, of course, but it's the topics and the things that we talk about that's the important piece to possibly get there, right? So what did he say? What did she say? What made it okay to tell? We know many times that our children outcry for all different reasons, right? And they're not on our time schedule. But if a child outcries, we want to look at what was happening within that family unit. Was dad arrested or mom arrested the night before, right? Was the child placed? These disclosure types of questions about what made it right is great for our investigators. I also want to bring up the piece about the emotional state of a child. Asking a child how something made them feel. I think years ago, interviewers thought kind of the feeling questions were too clinical and therapeutic. You have to have a purpose in everything you do with all of your question formation so that you can legally defend it. But again, we want to expand those questions to include the emotional state of children. So asking feeling questions, those are important questions, right? And did someone ever tell you not to say, or did something or someone stop you from telling before? Those kinds of open prompts, always using, of course, someone or something, and giving children the option out, of course, with our question formation, really provide valuable information. So we don't want to forget about the acts. Those are critical. But again, taking that holistic approach so that your team gets a full vision of what this child is experiencing and what this family and how that family functions. I think about a case that I had not too long ago where the child talked about the basement. And I think for years, everyone would think about exploring all about the basement. I want us to linguistically look at the question formation, though, and think, when we ask questions in certain ways, we get descriptive types of answers, right? So the basement was dark, or the basement had a couch, or the basement had a rug, right? Those are things we need to gather. But I want you to expand more on experiencing types of questions for the child. And so what did you see in the basement? What did you hear in the basement? All of those sight, sounds, smells, tastes are really powerful idiosyncratic details for later on for our law enforcement and our prosecutors. I also love We often talk about most recent, right, from a memory standpoint for children, and the first time for our charging information, right? But we also need to look outside of those beyond first and most recent and last time, because that might not be the time that creates the most corroborating information for you. So you need to be looking at different locations, right? Multiple victimizations or multiple years of maltreatment. I always use timelines. That's a nice way for children to be able to clarify in their verbal disclosure, what happened when. And then again, when I'm done, they have a clear piece of where they're going to go to get that corroborating information. I also love, we never want to do hypotheticals with children, just as a FYI, but I love the piece about what others said. Did someone talk to you? Did you talk to somebody about your relationship with your soccer coach, right? And having that other conversation and what they told other people should be explored as well. But you all know, oftentimes it's kind of as a last kind of question before we move to closing our interview, that interviewers will say, well, other than me, did you tell somebody else about what happened? And who was that? What did you tell them? Right? I want our interviews to be more conversational and organic in that open-ended realm, and beginning to the middle to the end with that episodic memory retrieval. I never want us to be in kind of a rote list of questions at the end to go, oh, I've got to explore other forms of maltreatment, so I'm just going to ask a whole bunch of questions right now. See where I'm going with that? We want them to come up naturally. I'm going to talk a little bit about telephones. Telephones is a hot topic. Technology obviously is very important to many children that we interview and to our cases. And I have lots of regions and jurisdictions that will say, oh no, we have the child leave their phones out with their caregivers. And then I have some regions and jurisdictions that say, no, we let the phones come in. So I'm posing this to you now, and when we get to the phone, we're going to talk about that. Just give me your thoughts on that. But for me, I use anything that the child communicates about, brings into the interview as a launching off point for discussion, right? How they communicate, what's happening, right? And how do they do that in their life? How does it look unique for that individual children or child before us? So refer to that sample list of questions. I absolutely love it. And specifically for our multiple victimizations, our victims of human trafficking, and just think about your most recent interviews that you've seen or done, or your cases. Did the interviewer ask about money being exchanged? I'll tell you a little bit about the Dallas example at the hotel I stayed in a minute. Are they asking those sensory sight, sound, smells? And really, what were the natures of conversations, right? Our ICAC task force needs certain information. That's why we developed questions specific and had help from ICAC in making that list of questions, because they need different information that some other cases might not need. But then we ask ourselves as interviewers, how do we gather the usernames? How do we ask about the logins? How do we phrase a question to talk about that first meeting, or who solicited that first meeting? All of the devices and media, or how communication was exchanged. There's just a wealth of information. And I do think sometimes we feel like when we obtain that disclosure, for lack of a better word, or get the disclosure, right, we're kind of lost. And where do we go next? Actually, that's where everybody should perk up. This is where the meat, for lack of a better way, for your investigators, this is where it all happens or doesn't happen, right? The fact that you have that outcry is not enough. we need to be asking all of those corroborating questions. And so I think of Anne Graffin Walker, a linguistical expert, obviously, in our field, and her third edition of her book, Handbook for Questioning Children, really breaks down the linguistical pieces that I want us to consider. But don't always have, right, one way of doing your interviews. I think we're so overworked and our caseloads are so heavy. I better than anyone know what you all deal with, and we're going to talk about that in the question piece. But I don't ever want us going into our work in kind of a, we do this, do that, do this, another day, another interview, another same thing, same thing, same thing. Just the opposite what I want you to do. I want you to prepare so thoroughly that every interview from a child's perspective does look different, that you're tailoring and creating your questions and asking your questions, and don't leave some area until you've gathered all of those. You know, years ago, we used to talk about our question formation in more of a funnel where you start open-ended and drill down for the details. That is not best practice right now, right? We always want to be open-ended, maybe have a direct or closed question, but always open it back up in that hourglass. I think we really need to focus in on our question formation. And I was excited to see in the most recent months, new research coming out from Tom Lyons, from Wolfman and others that focuses on the question types that interviewers ask, because that is directly related with the information that you'll receive from the child. I respect Michael Lamb as well. And Michael Lamb's research even shows us that when we see hesitancy, when we see any kind of tentativeness from a child, the interviewer goes into panic mode, and they basically throw their protocols out the window and start asking very direct, rapid fire questions. Let me tell you, folks, if we're asking questions in a very direct way, we get very little information. I want us to really focus on our question formation. I also want to share this as well. I understand the law enforcement that I do interviews for, and I'll use ICAC as an example. They need very specific information. And your team and your team members might be asking your interviewer to ask a question that isn't age or developmentally appropriate, or isn't phrased in the right way that I can legally defend in court, because that's my job, to have purpose and legally defend everything that I ask for you. However, I want to just give you hope and encouragement that any yucky question, right, any question that's given to us, we can rephrase that to make it appropriate and still gather the information that our teams need. It's all in question formation. So now what I want to provide for you is a real scenario of an outcry, a disclosure that was received. And I want to talk to you and give you sample questions. And as we go through this exercise, I want you to think about your interviews and if questions are asked in this way. So let me just read this. A 17-year-old boy is interviewed, and this is what the 17-year-old boy says. For the past year, my father has been selling me as a prostitute. Every couple of weeks, my dad tells me to go down the road a couple of blocks to a man's house. The man lets me in and takes me to the bathroom. From the medicine cabinet, he gets a jar of white pills with the black cross on them. He gives me a couple of pills. There is always a blue cup on the sink. After I take the pills, we go down to the basement. He continues, there is carpeting and a bearskin rug in the basement. There is also a bar and a refrigerator filled with cans of beer. We drink the beer and toss the empty cans on the carpet. Then we both masturbate and give each other oral sex until we both ejaculate, usually on the rug. Afterwards, he gives me $100 bill. I go home and give it to my dad. It last happened 10 days ago. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is a great disclosure, right? It is a great disclosure, but there's so much more we need to ask. And so let's talk about this. I had someone tell me the other time I presented this, oh my gosh, I might have just left that, right? Pretty good disclosure. Yeah, but it's not enough. So think about some things, and I know in this huge forum with all of you on here, you're happy to put in the chat. I've got Victoria with me, but my purpose is to give you the sample language. So I think it's obvious that you're going to seize the white pills. But look at these 6 questions that the sample language that I've provided that can even be providing more corroborating evidence. I understand you're not investigators, but your investigators want you to ask this. So we seize them, but we want to ask the child, obviously, tell me all about the pills, right? More than descriptive things. This is where I think the descriptive things we ask don't necessarily give us the sensory, idiosyncratic, rich things for our investigators to corroborate. So how do you feel, or how did it make you feel when you took the pills, right? Did he make you take one or more than one pill? Utilizing those skills that you use for all different kinds of questions. Tell me all about after the pills, right? What we're really trying to figure out with this sample questions or sample language, we want to know when the feeling started, when it stopped, right? When did they feel they weren't affected by the pills again, right? When did you feel yourself again? And not limiting on the pills, not assuming that it was just the pills, but was there something else involved that they were made to take or drink or eat or something? I think we've done a really great job in the field of forensic interviewing by not asking leading, suggestive, or coercive, or using coercive techniques. But one thing I do feel very strongly that interviewers still struggle with is making assumptions. Now, they can be easy assumptions and not deal breaker assumptions, but assumptions can be just as problematic as a leading question. Give you a very simple example as we go through this case study, though, on assumptive questioning. Some people think that the most preferred open-ended question, like, tell me everything about school, is a great question. However, you've just assumed that that child goes to school. I think of the many children that I've interviewed that are homeschooled or educational neglect. They're not going to school, and maybe my team and investigators don't know that. But in a way, I just offered that in there. It's much better off to ask a yes or no question before making an assumptive type of question. So again, do you go to school is much better, and then pairing it with tell me everything. Same thing goes with the corroborating evidence questions. Don't assume that the pill was even taken with water, right? Don't assume that the pill was taken with anything, right? So that's what I want to break down with regards to when we are asking corroborating questions. The blue cup is obviously going to be seized for DNA and fingerprinting, but you want to know more about the blue cup. So tell me everything about the blue cup. Where did it go? What happened, right? What did he put in the cup? Tell me all of that. Was there ever something else in the cup? Did you touch the cup? Did he touch the cup or something else? Mix up your questions. Another thing I think is really critical to share today is that our questions have to be more than tell me abouts to get corroborating evidence for our law enforcement, CPS, and prosecutors, our investigative team, right? And so we want to mix up our question types, whether it's an option out like something else, whether it's a cued going back, whether it's using time segmenting, using what we learned as research supports with that narrative event practice early on in our process. This is where you use what you learned in that episodic memory training practice in rapport to make it all happen in the disclosure piece. Tell me everything, right? From the beginning to the middle to the end. And as the child's verbally disclosing, you're then asking all of these corroborating questions. I mean, obviously, seize and test for prints on the empty beer cans. Are we asking, as something like that comes up, are we asking right then and there all about the beer cans, what they look like? One time or more than one time again. Tell me what the beer tasted like. What did you see? What did you hear? What did it feel like, right? Not only on your body, what did the pills make you feel like? What did the beer make you feel like? And as I'm teaching this today, I'm not wanting it to be kind of in a rote list, right? We want it to be more conversational and organic. I always make my next question based on what the child said, but those sensory are so, so powerful. Obviously, we're going to seize the garbage and collect all of the beer cans. Think about the bearskin rug and the carpet, the semen stains. I'm going to tell you, little Lucas, a case study that I did that I think it'll bring home the polyvictimization screening that you should do. But you're going to ask all about the carpet from the beginning to the middle to the end, not just what the carpet looked like, what color the carpet was. You want to ask those sensory. And then constantly talking about what was said. Right? Kids oftentimes, as you know, have problems with source monitoring. So we want to, as they're verbally telling us about something, asking, did he say something on the rug? Right? Where did this go? Where did that go? How did that make you feel? Right? Children, that's where we get the powerful information. He said that he'd kill my mom. It made me scared, right? If we don't ask, they don't tell. They don't know to tell. You know, that's the other piece that I think we need to understand with regards to corroborating evidence. Kids think you have all the information. They don't know that you don't have all of it, right? You have an allegation. You have an intake form. You might have some knowledge, right? Within this family and this case, but kids think you know it all. So just two reminders there. Always use Tom Lyon, a respected researcher. I know you all know Tom. Respect him so much. I love his ignorant interviewer, that term that he coined. It's so powerful when we say things to children like, I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. Tell me everything about what happened on the carpet and the bearskin rug. Right? From the beginning to the middle to the end, and really concretely breaking down and anchoring one event and not moving forward to anything else until you have all of those corroborating pieces. I think sometimes we kind of, again, want to jump around or pull at straws. Another piece with regards to the I wasn't there kind of really great, rich statement, empowers children to know they're the information holder, right? Another statement that I love is to the I wasn't there, is to avoid, not that I love, I want you all to avoid this. Never say to a child, I heard. When we say I heard to a child, really in any role that we're in, it says that we have all the information and we just want you to reaffirm what we already know, right? So be really cautious of that. Going back to our scenario now, let's look at the neighborhood, collateral witnesses, right? Ask about children going into and out of the other man's home. We want to know if there's other potential victims. Did you see something? What did you see when you walked to the man's home? What did you hear when you walked to the man's home? Tell me everything about when you first walked into the man's home. What did you see? And take it that detailed. What was the weather like? These are great corroborating elements. But think about the last time you asked about weather in your interviews, right? Think about all of the technology, the phone, the cell phone, the email records. We're going to check bank records, right, for withdrawals, deposits. You know, was it he said $100 bill, right? Is there evidence in deposits being made and things like that that would corroborate that statement? Search for $100 bills in the father's possession. Does he have them, you know, stored somewhere? Does the child we're interviewing know that? And so sometimes we also think that a child might not be able to give us that information. I always ask. And then, you know, if they say they don't, tell me all about what you do know, right? From their perspective. I love talking about the phone. So here's where I'm going to bring the little cell phone thing. I don't know what your practice is, but it has generated some really good discussions. And some of the discussions that I've heard is, you know, I don't want to bring the phone in the room, or as soon as the child gets into the room, I make them turn it off and set it down. You know, that's creating a barrier and a block with that art and that science kind of balance that I talked about earlier. I use the phone or anything that a child brings in. My overarching recommendation is it's not a block until it affects the communication that I have with that child. That's what we're doing. We want to adapt or modify anything that might affect my communication with this child, but I don't want to the first 5 seconds of meeting the child say, you know, turn off your phone. And let me tell you, the last people that any child wants to hold their phone while I'm interviewing them is their caregivers. Let's leave your phone with your caregiver. That's not going to go over well, right? So if a child's using their phone, I just ask about their phone. These are great ways for you to incorporate whatever's presenting in the interview to your holistic approach and questioning them about everything, not just one thing. Ask them how they communicate. What other types of technology do they use? And then you can sprinkle in those questions about movies or magazines or other things they've been exposed to. Has anyone taken a picture of you or made you take a picture of them or something else, right? Tell me how your dad communicated. Did he say something about the man, right? And really exploring all these things. Can you notice as we go through these slides on that one piece of disclosure that we received from that young man, all the things that are providing for our law enforcement corroborating pieces. Bank records, how money got exchanged. Now, granted, when we think developmentally appropriate, some children aren't going to be able to know that, right? And it's okay that they don't. Adjust your questions to make them age and developmentally appropriate. Did someone ever talk to you about the money? Again, source monitoring. What did they see? Did they see anything, hear anything? Those sensory, I think we should really increase within our forensic interviews. And when you gave your dad the money, then what happened? Use those facilitative cues to keep the narrative going instead of making another question up. So this will be in the suggestions at the very end, but you know, you should be making your question based on what the child just said. That helps with that sequential timeline. Obviously, it's going to be purposeful, right? We're not going to follow them down a rabbit hole. But you said you gave your dad the money. Then what happened? We're not done talking about that, right? Instead of ending everything that a child says and going on to something different, think about the multiple things that we could gather from just that money or just the pill or just the beer, right? Or just the bearskin. There's a good amount of time to be spent in each of those areas. So don't leave it until all appropriate details are explored. The best feeling I can have is when I check in with my team. I wear an earpiece for a young child. I step out for an older child. But the best thing my team can tell me is, nice job, no other questions, right? Because I've explored all of those. I think about what they need, right, for their charges. And this is where I think a lot of questions came in the early polls with team development, that camaraderie, how we hold each other up in tough times, right? Tough cases, overworked schedules or caseloads, right? But I'm going to work with my team to know the elements of the crime, right? And make all of my questions age appropriate. No longer do I want our pre-interview meetings with law enforcement to be, okay, here's what we got, here's how old the child is, da, 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 5 minutes, and then you go into the room, right? I really want us to spend a good amount of time having discussions. What if this presents? okay, what if this adolescent says something that they've been involved in during the victimization, like a crime, right? What is my team thinking about that? We're going to get to the evidence piece here, but what physical evidence or other evidence do we have, whether it's externally derived or tangible, right? And what are some thoughts we need to give to that? I don't ever want you to feel like you're alone on the island, and that's why I say always reach out to us at Zero Abuse Project. We're there. We're an email or a phone call away to help you with any concerns you have. I really love staying right there for that single road and guiding that child through whatever they want to talk about and making your next question based on what they just said. That will eliminate you grabbing at straws. I see a couple chats. I will get to them at the end, I promise. We've got a few more minutes. And I want to talk about a hot topic. Y'all know introducing evidence is a hot topic. And so let's dive into this. Just a couple considerations. The National Children's Alliance, the national body that oversees the standards for child advocacy centers and forensic interviewing, they have standards for your multidisciplinary team and your CAC. And so I've just listed all of them here. It's huge, right? The standards are huge, but this is the piece I wanted to bring you to was number 10. Number 10 is you must have within your forensic interviewing process, whether you use Child First or NICHD or ABSAC or NCA, they're all very similar. We all collaborate and work together with the articles that we've published together. And a lot of my great friends are in other realms of protocols, but we all have similarities. We all navigate through the same phases, and these standards say you've got to be able to articulate your policy, your standard for introducing evidence within the forensic interview. And so all of those written guidelines and agreements that your CACs have should be agreed upon by all multidisciplinary team members. And here's where I'm going to just say something else. With those policies that everybody's agreeing to in that MOU, then you actually have to do it. You don't get to pick and choose which child in which particular area of your state or jurisdiction gets a full investigation and this gets just this kind of investigation. All children should be afforded the same opportunity when it comes to our investigations. And so have consistency with your practice. And that's why we have wonderful organizations like the National Children's Alliance and ABSAC, American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children, that provides guidelines and standards. So our overall recommendation is have a thoughtful approach. You know, there's a difference in every single case. And what I mean by that is sometimes, most of the times, for the child advocacy centers, the case is there for a purpose. We just don't pull kids off the street and do a forensic interview, do we, teams? No, there's a purpose. There's been an outcry. There's a reason we're there today. And so when I think about that outcry, the outcry's been made already, or there's a precautionary, someone's outcried for them, right? In some of our federal cases, they have all the evidence and no outcry, right? They identify and rescue and recover, and they just do amazing work. Shout out to all of those folks. But we need to articulate the differences and the process that we use. Just like, oh, here's a question I always get. Do you think we need just one nationally recognized protocol in the nation, Rita? And I say no, and here's why. There's no one right way to interview a child, and I learn so much, as everyone learns, from all of the teachings that we get from all the different protocols. The same thing is here when we think about some of the emerging issues in the field right now. There's no one right way to introduce evidence, and every process that's utilized may be different. So there's not one fits all. Like, we always do it this way if my team has evidence, or we always do it this way. I think it should go back to our foundational, at least my foundational and zero abuse projects and child first foundation is everything we do is in the best interests of the child. There's been a number of times in the thousands of children I've interviewed that they have done away with the case to save the child. And I respect that, right? And so we do want to have advanced training on introducing evidence, learn what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And you've got to have that discussion with your MDT, right? And your DAs should be involved in that decision making. For lack of a better term, I don't want anybody out there just doing rogue introducing of evidence without even having that agreement as to what's happening and what's agreed upon. Because ultimately, right, your DAs have to protect in court. And so the discussions in the field, just a couple thoughts. We never want to use anything, and I'll say evidence, and I'll also say diagrams and interviewing aids, because we use interviewing aids. I use diagrams and dolls in my forensic interviews in a purposeful and legally defensible manner. But like evidence or diagrams should never be used to elicit a disclosure. I'm going to say it again so I'm not misunderstood. Evidence and interviewing aids should never be used to elicit a disclosure. They merely are aids to allow children to communicate or show, right, or discuss things differently, right? We all know verbal disclosures are important as we walk them through the beginning to the middle to the end. That's how we gather all of those corroborating evidence pieces. But we never want to disregard that a huge percentage of children, trauma symptoms, children who have experienced multiple forms of maltreatment, multiple victimizations, right? We don't want to ever disregard that they may need other means of communication. And so it's never going to be to elicit something. It's always going to be to facilitate that verbal discussion. And so we've always got to hold our teams accountable on case focused or child focused. I'm just going to say it. I'm currently in the middle of co-authoring an article with a great friend and friend Pete Singer on trauma, right? And how children and introducing evidence can affect. And it's all of these things right here. Realize that sometimes our children don't know about the evidence that y'all might have. There's already reluctance or that cost-benefit analysis that they're doing, right? Should I stay within the confines of what is normal in my life, even if it has and involves maltreatment? Or do I step out into the unknown and trust all y'all, right, to protect me? The child's health and wellness holistically, right? Their safety, health, and wellness needs to be above everything else. And then I always go back to the purpose. I'm not saying don't do it. People ask me, have you introduced evidence? Yes, I have. And I've done it in a way that's in the best interest of the child. That's all I'm saying, right? But can someone else identify whatever evidence that you do want to use? And do I, as the forensic interviewer, need to be the one to introduce that? Is it appropriate for me to introduce it? Now, I know we have interviewers of all roles. I have interviewers like myself who do interviews at a CAC. We have many law enforcement that do their own forensic interviews, and then CPS investigators also do forensic interviews. Just understand when you're doing a forensic interview, your hat or role at that moment is one of a forensic interviewer, right? You can't bring in your investigative roles. You can't bring in your CPS conversations, right? You want to make sure that we're differentiating between that. And just some overarching here, 7 considerations I want to is remember child's best interest. Can somebody else identify what's my role? Do we know if the child knows about this? The other thing too, I think is really important to think about. I think about a journal that was given to me a few years ago, and I was asked to present that into my interview, and I had said, how about I approach it this way? I understand the child's not disclosing. Let's see if I can bring up, and I ended up bringing up organically, of course, talking. The child said she liked to write poems, and I said, tell me more about your writing. And as we talked, she brought up and said, oh, they've got my diary, don't they, or journal? I don't know what she called it. And I said, tell me more about saying that, right? Eliciting it from the child. And she says, well, my mom wrote a lot of stuff in there. And so you never know if what you're introducing, in this particular case, mom owned it. Mom was writing in her journal another way, obviously, right? That very crafty, I guess, for lack of a better word, but mom had written that. So if we didn't, but if I had introduced that, I would have actually been presenting false information. So think about first, not only the best interest in how this could affect the child, but how can it affect our interview and our investigation? And do I have a purpose? We've already said a number of these things, but I can't emphasize it enough. We truly believe at Zero Abuse Project, you have to have that thoughtful conversation with your team. Have a policy in place that meets those National Children's Alliance standards. If you need to have a sample of that, we have one written, utilizing something that's only in the best interest of the child. If I introduce, it's going to have to be that this is the child that might die tonight, right? It has to be for their safety in what I'm going to introduce, not to elicit some sort of disclosure. And how we go about introducing the evidence, I have in the past really used my conversation to explain to the child my process. I've oriented them to the way. I've done a narrative event, episodic memory practice, and I'm very transparent with the child. And so when I communicate things, I go broad first, and I might talk about, my team. I talked earlier about the team that I work with, and the team that I work with has A, B, or C, and talk to them. And then always remember, don't rescue a child too quickly. And what I mean by that is when they say something or ask a question, instead of answering, like, does your team have the chats or the pictures, I always reflect back and say, tell me more about asking that, or what makes you ask that, right? And really, this again generates a lot of great information for my investigators on where that question's coming from. I was so happy and so honored to co-author with Victor Veith, our Director of Research and Education at Zero Abuse Project, an article for ABSAC. We recently, I participated in September on their national panel. I really, really loved and was honored to present with all of the other nationally recognized protocols folks and looking at emerging issues in the field. And we were asked to write an article. So it did get published in the ABSAC Advisor in September of 2020, just a couple months ago, right? If you need it, email me. We're happy to show it. But all the protocols did an overview of their protocol and then address some emerging issues in the field. Introducing evidence was one of them. And I wanted to share a couple thoughts that we put in, Victor and I put into our article, right? But what's so great about that ABSAC Advisor is that you get to see everybody else's opinion too, right? And so it's been a huge topic for many years. And like I said, I respect everyone who has maybe different approaches to how they do things. But I just wanted to provide that in there. And just three thoughts, it could expedite the disclosure, but have long-term effects with regards to trauma for the child. Secondly, it actually may weaken the case by only and solely focusing on the evidence rather than, again, what you all as forensic interviewers, I know I've got some interviewers out there today, you do so well, right? Think about the disclosures that you do receive. Think about the details you do gather and other forms of maltreatment, which it's supported by the research that we need to be collecting, right? And just a final way to state it, you know, if we focus only on the evidence as our primary way to, you know, get that disclosure or have the child outcry, it may give us the tip of what this child might be experiencing, but it won't give you the holistic of everything that this child's experiencing. So our goal, as supported by others, is it requires advanced training, right? We want to be sure that you and your teams are on the same page and that you're consistent with your practice, and so that we don't have any concerns with different ways in which it's done, right? Purpose and legally able to defend. This is our poly-victimization screen, and I'm happy to share it with you as well. Really just how you navigate. It's a fluid process. Your interviews should be fluid. And so, you know, we have within our process, our forensic interviewing process, different times throughout our process where it naturally is good to explore more about family relationships, to explore more about other forms of maltreatment. I promised you my story about Lucas, and I'll have to just do it very quickly here as I finalize and open up for questions here in a few minutes. But two things that I'll tell you about Lucas. He was 7 and he was there on a sexual abuse allegation. It'll define exactly what this shows here on the slide. He was there, neighbor was the offender, and sexual abuse allegation, like I said, and early on Lucas was talking about his family. I'm organically exploring family. And I said, no other history within the system. I just want to say that mom and dad had brought Lucas to the center that day. So I start to interview. As I asked, he started talking about macaroni. So I just ask a very simple question, one that's included on that sample list of questions I mentioned earlier. Who cooks for you is what I said. And Lucas proceeds to say the following: mommy does the good cooking, daddy does the bad cooking. Now, some of you might just focus on dad. I did not. I'm a neutral fact finder, right? I explored mom. I said, Lucas, tell me everything about mom's good cooking. His response was, mommy gets it and they put it in the car in the bags at the church. There's numbers, Rita, there's numbers, if you can eat it or not. He's talking about expiration dates. Tell me all about your favorite thing mom cooks. Macaroni and cheese, and I like the hot dogs, and da-da-da-da-da-da. And I even explored, you know, are there ever times that you don't have food or something like that, right? I'm gathering all of those things for my team. CPS needs to know, law enforcement needs to know if there's no food, right? Mom and dad are in our waiting room, right? We have our neighbor as the offender. I'm not focusing on him. I'm listening and exploring all forms of maltreatment, giving my investigators a holistic view of what this child's experiencing. After I explore mom's good cooking, those were the child's words. We never want to use good and bad in our work, but those were Lucas's words, so I use them. Then I explored all about dad's bad cooking, and this is what the child told me. Rita, that's the part I can't see. There's big pots in the kitchen and daddy puts foil on the windows when he cooks and it smells really bad. And Rita, he locks me in my bedroom and he ties me to my bed, and see, he showed me, it was wintertime. See, they're my jump ropes that are hanging from my bed. And Rita, sometimes I'm locked in my room so much, I have to pee-pee and I pee-pee my pants and the carpet gets all wet. I asked all the corroborating questions, just like we did in that example earlier about the 17-year-old boy, where the jump rope is. Do you think my law enforcement cut out the carpet? Yes. There was no history of drugs with his family. My team is on the phone. Narcotics is in the other room, right? They're getting a search warrant for the home as that's happening. Mom and dad are no longer in the waiting room after my interview, right? They were arrested. But Lucas goes on to tell me, as I'm gathering all of this corroborating evidence about the bad cooking is what he called it. And then when mommy and daddy have their parties, their cooking parties is what Lucas called it. Tell me more about the cooking parties. Well, that's when me and Susie and Sally have to go over to neighbor Bob's. See where I'm going here? Yep. They're not only having a drug party, and you know what he's cooking. Dad's cooking meth. I won't have you guess, but they're distributing. My investigators, law enforcement, had no idea this was a huge meth lab, right? A distribution. So kids would go over to neighbors while they had their big drug parties. We had 2 additional victims identified just in exploring and asking who cooks for you, Lucas. Of course, we got to the neighbors and we got all of the sexual abuse allegation, but that's just an example of how this can look when we really consider polyvictimization and screening for all forms of maltreatment. Really, really powerful case. Moving on, and I know William's about ready to bring the hook in and take me off, but you all know this, the best practice. It's in your slides. Nothing should change. The core components of best practice and what you've always done should maintain. We should have that consistency. If a child outcries in Michigan and a child outcries in Florida, we want that consistency that they're all given the same investigation process, and it needs to have an eye towards corroboration. Or it's going to be a he said, she said case, and we're not going to be successful. We've learned a lot over the years historically, right? We know why MDTs are formed, and we know why CACs are there, right? We know best practice and how to do it. But still today, we see shortcuts. We see things happening at the onset that's affecting our success in the judicial process. So have specialized investigators, which many of you have. Involve the prosecutor at the onset of an allegation. And then consider, like I said, those episodic event retrieval, and give children a starting off point, a launching off point. Tell me everything from the beginning to the middle to the end. What's the first thing that happened, Lucas? Children don't know where you want them to begin, so oftentimes they kind of start in the middle. So that language will give them a launching off. As a reminder, we've talked about the relationship. We've talked about all the drawings that we can do, right? Keep open. Keep that conversation, that verbal, right? Before directly going to something like evidence or something else. Use time segmenting. Tell me everything from this time to this time. It's so amazing. And like I said, tell me more about your phone. Use those things that are brought up in maybe rapport about what the child likes to do. And always, always consider the child first. You've seen those 2 slides, and then I'm going to end and open it up for questions. But I want to tell you about these group scenarios that you'll have in your worksheet. We have them here not to go over today, but this is a way that you can talk to your team about a number of different scenarios and talk about how you would go in gathering those corroborating details, or how you might use evidence and ask about evidence and alternatives, right, to introducing evidence. So in closing, here's what I want to say as I stop sharing and give it over for questions. In your jobs, you're overworked, your caseloads are heavy. And I know one thing for sure, you oftentimes get very, very little thanks. Today, on behalf of myself and my entire team at Zero Abuse Project, I thank you today. Whether you know it or not, you're the children's heroes. You're their voices, and you're also a hero to me. Thank you for all that you do for the children in your state, and all the work that you do to protect them. And now we're going to open it up for questions. And Victoria, let me just open my chat here. Any questions? I hope that you so enjoyed that. And don't forget, reach out to Zero Abuse Project. We're here for technical assistance. We're also here to consult and provide any assistance. Our website also has a number of links for all of our training opportunities, many of them at no cost. So check out our website, www.zeroabuse spelled out project.org.
All right, I'm happy to ask you a couple questions.
Yes.
The first one we have is, how would you ask a preschooler about the beginning, middle, and end?
Oh, I love that. I've even interviewed a 2.5-year-old and got a great narrative event, episodic memory training. Now, remember, preschool age children are going to give us words, not sentences and paragraphs, right? But they can still give us narrative. So you're going to tell them, tell me everything about playing with your dogs or whatever you've identified with that child as something they like to do. From the beginning to the middle to the end. What's the first thing that happened when you played with your dog this time? So for young preschool age children, we just have to give them context. We have to be simple and concrete and give them a launching off period. Just on the flip side of that question, for our adolescents, I always qualify it to the adolescents as well. Instead of just talking about a neutral event, I let the adolescent know that I ask questions. When I listen, I ask a lot of questions, and I do this practice. It's okay to tell them about that episodic memory training that you're going to do in rapport, explaining it to them, right? So I hope that was helpful. And then if they give you 2 words, you tell them that you say, then what? Or then what happened? And then walk them through. Blakely was an example of my 2.5-year-old that I did a great narrative. She talked about mommy playing with dogs. The dog bit her finger. It was hurting. She showed me on the finger. She also gave us some really interesting information about something else mom had said. The other suggestion I have for preschool age children is to consider an expanded interview process with this population. We've identified in our Child First Expanded, which works for all protocols, just so you know, it's basically meeting with the child more than one time in a legally purposeful and legally defensible manner. It could even be in the same day. So for a preschool age child who is going to be more difficult to do that episodic memory training and narrative event practice, but we still want to follow the research and still do it, we don't want to abandon it, then I would recommend meeting with them more than one time and spending time in those tasks and activities to assist that child with how you ask questions and the things that you do within your process. Hope that's helpful. Another question, Victoria?
Yes, thank you so much. The next question is, can you talk a little bit about the use of therapy or facility dogs during a forensic interview?
Oh, I love our courthouse dogs that I've done a lot of work with, assisted dogs from the West. I have an advanced presentation on utilizing dogs within our forensic interviews, and it's probably too long, so if you want to email me offhand, but they can be very effective tools, right? But there are things that we need to consider, just like everything else: purpose, considerations, and techniques. A couple examples, I always recommend that we introduce the dog, right? We have the dog there from the beginning to the middle to the end of our interview, not just bring them in when the dog is needed. So I have a ton of information regarding utilizing dogs in our interview. I think that we also have to define that there's different kinds of dogs, different training that's provided. And so we never want to, like our field, we have so many acronyms, right, in our field. We also have terminology that means the same thing to some people and different things to some people, right? So we have courthouse dogs that are used in forensic interviews. We have therapy dogs and facility dogs. I mean, I just want to be sure that I articulate that we also need to talk about what defines that particular animal, what training that animal has been in, and what their purpose and use is for. So love, love, love that topic, and happy to talk a little bit more offline about that, but they are great interviewing aids. I consider them an interviewing aid as well that we can employ if purposeful and legally defensible in our interviews.
Great. Thank you so much, Rita. We have another question for you. How do you get to the topic of concern when the child has no clue why they are at the CAC?
Oh, I love this question. Well, first, we need to start doing a lot more interviewer preparation and child and family preparation. We have a whole other training called Preparing Our Child and Families for Our Process. I never want you to ask a child, how come they're there today, or tell me what they know about being there today, and you get some random answer like toy tester, mommy said I was going to the dentist or the doctor, right? That makes your job more difficult. So we have provided, and I have this language, it's really a script. I want you to give your frontline professionals, give your CPS law enforcement so that they can prepare the children. It's not coaching them, it's giving context to this process that's so unknown. We also have language, and it's also in our first response training also. We also have language for caregivers and what CPS and law enforcement should say to caregivers to prepare them. Because I guarantee you, when our first responders, law enforcement and CPS, leave the house or school or set up the interview, the next thing that the parent is doing is running and getting that child and saying, what's going on? You know, right? Asking 100 million different questions to that child. Whether they do it with their words or not, subconsciously they're telling the child not to talk about it because they are panicked. The state was just here, right? Y'all, the myths for child protection and law enforcement just sadden me. You know, what does our society think CPS does? That they take children away. They have no context to know that that's exactly the opposite of what you want to do. You are all about reunification, right? It takes a lot for you to take a child and remove a child. And the same thing for law enforcement. You know, a lot of folks don't understand how you serve and protect, right? And all that you do in your jobs. And so we have to start educating and teaching, not just our team, but our public, right? Our entire communities to understand how you investigate. So we have sample language for parents because you need to tell them what they should and shouldn't say to the child. You need to give them language, what's appropriate to say, not to say, and we have all of that already developed for you. So email me, please.
Great, thank you, Rita. The next question is, how do you ask about sexual abuse to different age groups when there has not been an outcry?
Yeah, I think your process needs to be flexible enough, all of the techniques that you're doing purposeful enough. And an example is we use interviewing aids like diagrams, and we teach 2 legally defensible manners in which you can use diagrams. And they are anatomically correct diagrams. I wish I had one to show you here, but let me know. We have a whole key. All of our states that are child first states, we had an illustrator pencil sketch. It's important that I say that because a lot of research and others use gingerbread cookies or clothed diagrams. That's not what we teach, but I'm happy to offline talk about that too. It's a whole nother, I could go on and on, but you know, the purpose for me using those is for 10 and under, just to arrive at a common language or what children call body parts. So can elicit, you know, all of the information for all ages of children. For smaller children, to be more direct on your answer, I use okay and not okay touches. But the reality in what we teach is we're going to be exploring a lot more than just touches. Touches is a teaching term, really. Kids, small kids, equate touch with their hand only, right? We're going to be asking about not okay, okay and not okay touches and everything else. Hits, kicks, punches, washes. A lot of our cases don't involve touches from a child's lens. So we need to be working in that language. See, again, it's all about our linguistics. We need to be working in language that talks about child pornography, right? And other forms of maltreatment that isn't you know, so direct, but it covers it all, right? We don't leave anything out. So I use okay and not okay. Appropriate terminology is like and don't like as well. We want to avoid good and bad touch. Always, never use that. I always do an X. But okay, not okay, like, don't like. My art is just I'm an okay, not okay person. I think all ages of children understand, and it's concrete enough for small children.
Thanks so much, Rita. If anyone has any other questions, can you please put them in the chat or in the Q&A portion of the platform?
I love all of the questions. And again, please know, you know, one thing during this pandemic that we often get in the next few minutes, unless Victoria gets another question, she'll chime in and interrupt me, but a lot of you are stressed. A lot of our teams are worn out. And so know that we do have suggestions for that team health, self-care. It's not about a number, right? It's self-care, a vicarious trauma for your teams, things that we can do to start encouraging teams to work and provide assistance to each other. And then we have some really unique ways in this virtual world to engage your team, and whether it be thank you letters or doing special things for your team. I just think we need to, now more than ever during this pandemic, encourage support, respect, give cooperation to your workloads, what you're seeing, and be there for each other. Remote teams are difficult, and I think it's ownership and accountability right along with that self-care. And what I mean by that is, you know, we all have to together, one child at a time, right, end child abuse, but you can do it. So I want to give you hope, because the children need you now more than ever.
Thanks so much, Rita. We have another question. If a child uses non-scientific vocabulary for body parts, do you correct that vocabulary, or do you use what the child used?
Oh, great question. We never want to correct a child. That child is the expert, and whatever whatever word the child uses is the word I use throughout my entire interview. I will just let you know that most children do not use scientific or anatomically correct names, so be prepared for that. But it's, again, great when the child uses words that's their own, and we follow their words. Always use the child's words. Yep. Even if you're uncomfortable with it. And I think I've got like 2 more minutes or 3 more minutes to throw this in here. I get it. Some adults aren't comfortable with diagrams or dolls or lots of things that we may do in the forensic interview. And this is where I always kind of say it like it is. Y'all know me or know that, but we have to get over ourselves. We have to get over our own discomfort with some interviewing aid or some researched, supported, evidence-based aid, and get over it. It's not about us, it's about the child. And children are not uncomfortable with the diagrams or the dolls that we use. So it's the adults, quite honestly. And when folks out there in the field tell you to do something or not do something, that's oftentimes their opinion. And I'm going to just end with saying, we all want the verbal disclosure from children, and there's an outcry and a purpose, we're there. But if we forget that not all children have the verbal, they've said something, they've disclosed in our interview, but it might be trauma, it might be too intense, it might be from a disability, from multiple victimizations, whatever the reason. I want to arm you with everything you can provide for that particular child that's in front of you that day in a legally defensible manner, and train you and teach you and help you do that. Then we're affording children all different modes of communication.
Thanks so much, Rita. We're just about out of time. I know we have a couple more questions, but I want to let everyone know we have your email addresses, and we'll be following up with all the particular participants who did not get their question answered.
Thank you again for all that you do.
All right, great. Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and let me share a quick, just a PowerPoint so I can go over the last few items here for our audience. And while I'm bringing that up, again, thank you very much, Rita and Victoria, for a very wonderful, wonderful presentation that you all have done today. And for our audience members here, just a few last minute things that I want to go over with everyone before we wrap up for today. Oops, if I let me start from where am I starting from here? I want to start from this slide. Sorry about that. Here, let me just play from current slide. All right. And I believe you all should see my, okay, there we go, showing the PowerPoint, okay, here. So again, we provided this information, but this is indeed Rita's information and also the website for Zero Abuse. So please, everyone, when you get a chance, feel free to reach out and also check out Zero Abuse's website as well that has helpful information and very helpful resources. Just a reminder to folks, please note that we will, if you would like to get in contact with OJJDP's INTAC, you may do so by contacting us at this information on this slide. If folks are interested in signing up for our listserv, you can text 22828 to sign up for the listserv in order to get more information about all of our webinars and our trainings that we have with INTAC. Oops, wrong way. Sorry. Do you would you like to get in contact with OJJDP's Help Desk? You may do so by dialing the number here or you reaching out via the website. The email address that's here, OJJDP TTA at usdoj.gov. And so any items that you need or materials or any questions that you have, you may do so by reaching out through those forms of communication. You can also visit OJJDP's website if you like to get more information about OJJDP as well. And then this is our contact information again. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way here. My apologies. Do you have a training or technical assistance need? Well, if so, you can send a request to the TTA 360 platform. Just go to tta360.ojjdp.ojp.gov. and we'll be able to get any training or technical assistance need done there. Just a reminder that the webinars will indeed be located on our YouTube page, and you can please feel free to reach out to the OJJDP TTA Help Desk if you would like any of the supporting materials. Please take a moment to review the slide here. And also, we have a couple of other webinars that are coming up. This Friday on the 6th, we have a webinar with our colleagues at NDAA. We also have another webinar with our colleagues with Zero Abuse coming up on November 10th. We have a webinar, and then we are finishing up the month of November with a couple of more webinars with our colleagues with Zero Abuse. Please be mindful that the webinar on the 19th is only for MDT, law enforcement, and prosecutors. And finally, let me stop sharing my screen. And what I want to do is just launch one last poll question for those remaining here. And this poll question essentially is for us to just get an idea from folks to know how you plan to apply the information that you learned today. And so that poll question will come up shortly. All right, and note that this poll question is multiple select, meaning that you can indeed select multiple options. And we just want to know, how do you plan on applying the information from this webinar? Please take a moment just to complete this information and let us know. Again, you can select multiple options here, but all we want to know is just how do you plan on applying the information that you learned from this particular webinar? Again, I want to thank our presenters, Rita, our moderators, Victoria, supporting staff at Intact for hosting a wonderful webinar today. I'm going to leave this up for maybe about another 20 seconds or so. Victoria and Rita, if you all would like, we can have a quick debrief afterwards, but to our audience, I'm going to bid them adieu and tell them thank you very much for joining today. Rita and Victoria, you all can stay on, and everyone else take care, and thank you very much. All right. All right. So we're in the practice session mode, so it's only us that can hear us, panelists and hosts. So Rita and Victoria just wanted to do a quick debrief. Again, Victoria, I'm making these common for our webinars. I just wanted to see any feedback you all have, any good, any bad, anything that you all would like to discuss during this time. Again, this is completely optional. So if you all are saying, fine, let's go ahead and we can wrap up, that's totally fine as well. But any feedback for today's webinar? Okay. Actually, hold on one second. It looks like people can still hear. So this is what I'll do. Well, I don't know. It looks like I put it in practice session mode. So it was supposed to be where folks cannot hear. But how about this? Rita and Victoria, I will email you all to follow up for today's webinar if there's a debrief that's needed. Because WebEx is not allowing for me to do a practice session, so apologies about that. And I can't, unfortunately, hear you all right now either. So nonetheless, I will send you all an email, and if you'd like to debrief, we can discuss that a little later on. So thank you all very much, and have a great afternoon, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.